Operator, team ready? All right. If no one, okay. If everyone can hear me fine, I would like to begin my time now. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Veiko Toika, and then, along with my co-debater, Rose Weathers, we stand in firm affirmation of today's motion. The U.S. federal government should substantially expand the NSA's authorization for domestic surveillance in order to counter cyber attacks launched from within U.S. territory. Quick roadmap. First, I'll be talking about frameworking. Then I will talk about why the NSA's lack of powers is an issue in the status quo, and then explain our plan for how the NSA's authority should be expanded, and then finally go into the benefits of our plan. So first of all, we would like to weigh this round on the net benefit of the American people, which means that the government has to just simply prove a benefit is being provided by the NSA having increased authority, and the op needs to prove harm or neutrality. So why are we talking about this motion in the first place? Why does the NSA lacking these powers actually harm Americans? So currently, the NSA cannot track domestic internet traffic in the United States because of laws barring domestic surveillance of Americans based around the Fourth Amendment. The problem with this, the reason why this has become problematic, is that currently foreign cyber attackers and cyber attackers based in the United States can utilize this lack of oversight as a loophole. As shown by recent data breaches by what we think are Russian and Chinese hackers, foreign hackers can completely avoid responsibility and being traced by routing their malware through proxy servers in the United States, because we can't look into these servers. We can't look into what data process too. So how will our plan fix this? So our plan states that Congress should pass legislation that allows the NSA to track the flow of data on the internet within the United States. This is obviously a substantial increase in power, as currently NSA cannot even look into what data is being passed through which server. Once again, this allows hackers to completely hide their tracks. It should also be specified that the NSA will not be allowed to open things or listen into things such as text messages, emails, phone calls, or any other private communications without fulfilling existing, specifications for probable cause or getting a search warrant. It can also, we can basically summarize this plan using the analogy that the NSA will be allowed to basically inspect regulate and track where trucks are going, but they will not be allowed to inspect the contents of these trucks. Finally, I would like to say that this is constitutional because it's essentially an expansion of regulating interstate commerce, because data is commerce occurring between states. And finally, because the Fourth Amendment is not violated, because we're not actually looking into the individual lives of Americans, individual privacy is not breached. Now, moving on to our contentions. Why is this plan going to provide a significant net benefit to American people? Our first contention is that it protects American privacy. So any cyber attack, so basically any cyber hack into a data owned by companies such as Google or pharmaceutical companies right now being leaked on the internet is obviously a massive harm to Americans, because they're going to lose their privacy. And this has happened in the past. Excellent examples are WannaCry, famously in the early 2000s, and a recent attack by Chinese hackers, who we think are Chinese hackers. We don't even know who they are, who basically compromised thousands of Microsoft Exchange hackers. And because they use US-based servers, we could not trace these things. Yes.
How are you going to be able to stop foreign interference when you're talking about domestic surveillance?
So currently the NSA has free hands with, or the CIA specifically, with surveillance outside of the United States. And there's definitely things we need to do to improve our cyber arsenal. But currently the biggest weakness we have is that these foreign attackers can simply go through US proxy servers, and we can't trace them. If they didn't, if we could look into these servers, we could trace them. Moving on. So currently, the problem is that these data hacks, basically these data breaches have been common in the United States, and we can't track them because we can't go through the NSA, as under the status quo, the NSA can't look into domestic servers. So the impact of this is that Americans constantly risk having their identity stolen from, and having money stolen from them through bank fraud or social security fraud, etc. So everything currently is on the internet, and when a data breach happens, that gets dumped on to whatever servers are now selling your identity or selling your data. And obviously that's a harm to Americans, both monetarily, in terms of their right to privacy. Clearly, we are seeing a harm to privacy in the status quo. The second contention, our second contention is that it protects Americans' lives to expand the NSA's authority. So, recently Russia, we think it was Russia, we're not quite sure because we can't trace them, hacked into the United States military servers, and essentially have now our foreign adversaries have now, through this attack, gained an indeterminate amount of information on the United States and the United States military capabilities. And this is according to New York Times, an article published in New York Times in fall of 2020. This is very problematic for the United States, because under the status quo, we can't actually trace where the malware came from. And the only way we can make sure, or the only way we can find out how much our foreign adversaries, which we think is Russia, actually knows about our military, is by going through all of our servers and manually scanning for malware, which is a process that could potentially take years and is currently slated to take years. So what does this mean? This means that currently an indeterminate amount of information about the US military is out there. This is obviously a major security risk for all Americans, because now foreign adversaries like Russia and China know our weaknesses and can divide plans in advance to exploit them. In the worst case, they can turn our own computers against us, and in the most extreme case, because we don't even know what kind of information they have, they could even launch our own nuclear weapons against us. In less extreme cases, even if you don't buy that, judges, it is important to remember that any information about the U.S. military on the internet is harmful to U.S. troops. Because, for instance, now foreign adversaries can distribute data on U.S. troop movements in flashpoints like in Afghanistan to terrorist groups like the Taliban. And this obviously means that the Taliban will be better equipped to kill U.S. soldiers, and that is going to hurt American citizens and the people that have a relationship with these soldiers. So clearly, we are seeing major problems in the status quo that expanding the authority of the NSA will help fix. We are not only going to see American privacy being more secured from what it is in the past, we're also going to objectively protect American lives by making sure that our military is not compromised. Once again, the NSA does have the capabilities, in my opinion, and the budget. The U.S. Cyber Defense Command has the budget to and the capabilities to track hackers in foreign nations. The problem is that when these hackers go through the United States, we can't trace them because of our own laws. And obviously, expanding the NSA's authority will subvert this problem. Once again, it's important to remember that the NSA will not be allowed to look at the personal information of Americans. It will only be allowed to track where data is going. Thank you. And for these reasons, I'm proud to affirm.
All right, awesome. Before I begin, is everyone ready? Awesome. Let me get my timer out. And I believe my speech will be 8 minutes. All right. My time begins now. Hello, everyone. My name is Mercer Weiss, and I'm the first speaker on the opposition side of the following resolution. The United States federal government should substantially expand NSA authorization for domestic surveillance to counter cyber attacks launched from United States territory. In my speech, I'll first be going over the framework of the round, essentially all of the framework brought up by the government side of the round. Then I'll be going over our own case, our three main disadvantages to their plan, and finally go over some refutations. Let's get straight to the framework. And I'd first like to point out that there were no definitions brought up in the round. And I feel like it's very important to analyze the topic itself and look at the definitions. Because first of all, we need to look at the definition of substantially increase and substantially expand. We said it is important that substantially means to increase or to expand. So that is in a definition that needs to be stated. And second of all, domestic surveillance. The topic itself says, launched from United States territories. Judge, we are looking at cyber attacks that were launched from the United States. The government themselves have all of their arguments centered around foreign interference from China, interference from Russia, and other foreign countries that they mentioned in their own speeches. We need to realize, Judge, that we're looking at cyber attacks in the United States territory. Since that was not pointed out by the government side, you must look at the opposition and pointing out this definition. It is crucial to the round because although they're going to make the argument that foreign interference somehow started in the United States, Judge, what we're looking at is that foreign interference itself is a source from some other nation and somehow manifests its way into the United States. But we are looking at cyber attacks started and launched in United States territory. Already, their points are not relevant to the round. It is important to consider the points that we're going to bring up from our own side because we are looking at launch from the United States and not from foreign nations. Yes, I'll take your POI.
Aren't U.S. servers in U.S. territory, like how we defined it, like that's what we're talking about?
Exactly, that is what I'm talking about. But what we're trying to say is that you guys are making arguments and bringing up evidence from foreign nations and foreign countries that are interfering with the United States. We're talking about cyber attacks that are launched from the United States. Now, with that being said, I'd like to go over their background and talking about their framework that they brought up. They talked about how the NSA can't currently authorize domestic surveillance in certain parts because they're restricted. However, they have actually in the status quo been collaborating with Homeland Security, and with Homeland Security Security and the NSA, they're able to tackle cyber attacks in the status quo. The NSA doesn't necessarily need to be expanded and substantially expanded, judges. The NSA collaborates with Homeland Security to eradicate all cyber attacks and to predict cyber criminals. No, thank you. I have a lot to get through in my speech. Now, I'd also like to mention that in their background, they brought up a lot about foreign attacks. Once again, Judge, we are looking at attacks launched from the United States. So you must be dropping all the evidence that they brought up from any nation other than the United States. With that being said, let's get into our own arguments. Our first main disadvantage is that the NSA currently is fully equipped. We see that currently in the status quo, the NSA has not had cyber attack issues on a large scale. We see that back in 2009 to 2011, cyber attacks were at its peak. It had been increasing at 17 times its previous rate prior to 2009. Now the NSA has developed technology, has developed the resources to be able to attack all of these cyber attacks that are launched from the United States. Again, Judge, we're looking at attacks from the United States. The NSA has domestic surveillance and authorization for domestic surveillance and to a certain extent for preventing cyber attacks that are launched from United States territory. This is important because right now, as our solvency, what we see in the status quo, we're already solving for cyber attacks because they're currently working on technology and they're developing the technology internally to be able to make improvements. With better technology within the NSA, we see three main impacts. First of all, we see less cyber attacks from the United States because of, I'll take your POI before I go into my impacts. I'll take your POI.
Okay, how is better technology going to help the NSA if they don't have the authority to use it?
They already have better technology and it's been working since 2009 and 2011 at the height of cyber attacks. Over time, we've seen better improvements. The technology itself has been preventing cyber attacks. Additionally, like I mentioned in my refutation against your background, the NSA is working with Homeland Security. With collaboration, they're able to tackle cyber attacks. Let's get more into our impacts. I already mentioned how we're going to be seeing less cyber attacks. Second of all, there's going to be more prediction for cyber attacks. We see that currently in the status quo, the United States has authorization to look at the sky, the sea, and other parts of intelligence and information that we have in the United States to prevent what the government was mentioning, like nuclear attacks. It is important that we save billions of dollars, and that is currently what is going on according to the New York Times. So in total, we see this grand impact of improving the quality of life of citizens because we care about healthcare, education, and all the other sectors that are being compromised from cyber attacks. The NSA is working and improving their current technology, and they're already fully equipped along with the Homeland Security to prevent what happened back in 2009 to 2011. Let's look at our second disadvantage to the government's plan, and that is increasing breaches. When you increase the amount of surveillance in any given nation, you see more breaches. And I'd like to bring up an example, an internal example of how increasing surveillance has caused more breaches. Let's look at the status quo. Dating back to 2016, the Government Accountability Office, like the NSA, but just on a smaller scale, increased surveillance in an infrastructure company called SolarWinds. And what we saw is that it became more vulnerable to cyber attacks, according to ACLU. With more surveillance, Judge, we see more vulnerability to cyber attacks, which means if you were to vote on the government side, there is a likelihood that there would be more cyber criminals and more cyber attacks. If we have more cyber criminals and more cyber attacks, we lose billions of dollars in revenue in the United States and will never be able to track the hackers. We need to vote on the opposition side because there is currently less access to surveillance from these cyber criminals that could compromise our nation's security as well as all the freedoms that we possess as United States citizens. Let's get straight into the refutations. Their first main point that they brought up, protecting United States privacy. And this argument is inherently flawed based off of the arguments that they brought up and the evidence to support it. They talked about how the foreign nations are interfering with the United States privacy. And I'd like to bring up the POI that I mentioned and how I talked about how they were talking about examples from other countries. And I asked about how does this come from the United States? How is it launched from the United States? And the first government side mentioned how it goes from a foreign country into the United States, and then from the United States, it becomes an issue. Judge, what we need to look at is the launch source. The launch source was in a different nation. That has nothing to do with domestic cyber attacks. Therefore, their point is inherently flawed. And even then, with protecting United States privacy, even if you were to vote on their plan, they would be compromising privacy by increasing the amount of access that these cyber criminals have to our own surveillance. Their second point was talking about the United States troops and how our military would be compromised. And they brought up the example of Iran. And Iran and other Middle Eastern nations and the Taliban have nothing to do with the cyber attacks that are launched in the United States. They do attack United States troops, but not cyber attacks launched in the United States. Therefore, you must be voting on the opposition side. Thank you.
Is everybody ready? Okay, I will be starting my time now. So hi, my name is Rose Weathers, and I'm again debating on the affirmative side of the resolution. The U.S. federal government should substantially expand NSA authorization for domestic surveillance to counter cyber attacks launched from U.S. territory. Okay, so a quick roadmap. First, I'm going to make some clarifications. Next, I'm going to go over the opposition's plan, then I'm going to go back to ours. Okay, so I really need to clarify what I think my partner eloquently stated in his first speech, that I believe the opposition is purposefully misinterpreting so that they can stick with their original arguments. When we have defined this all in our plan and explained it extremely thoroughly many times to make sure that everyone can get this. When we talk about cyber attacks launched from U.S. territory, we are talking about United States servers, which is a problem in the status quo. What my partner explained and what I will explain again, wasting my time because the opposition is purposefully misinterpreting our framework, these foreign entities are getting U.S. servers and they are going through U.S. servers to hack into our things in the United States. This is U.S. territory because it is a U.S. server. If it is a foreign server, it does not fall under this debate. All of the things that we discussed in our contentions were done through US servers, and the reason why they're an issue is because the NSA is unable to track exactly where they came from, which means that they cannot deal with the issues. So again, these are not foreign computers, foreign servers, they are foreign people. They are Russian and Chinese governments, but they are using US servers and US things on the internet to hack into US technology. This is United States territory, and we are legally not allowed, the NSA is legally not allowed to look into this because it is United States servers. And this is the issue we are debating on. This is the framework we set for the round. We talked about all of this background. We explained this extremely thoroughly, and the opposition is still misinterpreting this to stick with whatever they wrote in their prep time because they didn't understand this context. Okay. Then what I'm going to go over next is their plan. So their first contention is that we can tackle cyber attacks in the status quo, which means we're already solving for this. Well, they've said that the NSA is collaborating with other agencies, such as the Homeland Security Agency, but they haven't specified how and how this is helping us. And they say this is important, but we as judges and us, we don't know what exactly they're doing. So there's no real evidence to back up how this is helping. But even if it's doing something, we know in the status quo, we have huge issues with cybersecurity from foreign entities using US servers to hack into US things. And this is a cybersecurity threat. We are not solving for this. What? Yes.
You realize that the Homeland Security is countering all cyber attacks that occur in the United States, meaning that along with the NSA, they're able to tackle all cyber attacks in the United States.
Actually, they're not, because we are seeing this issue now. If the Homeland Security Agency was able to take care of this, then it would be taken care of. We need the NSA, as we have stated in our plan very clearly, to do this, because the NSA, regardless of however it's collaborating with the Homeland Security Agency, is not able to do this. And then they talked about evidence from 2009 and 2011 and how we're going to get more cyber attacks because we are having more surveillance. what we have stated in our plan is that we are not going to be, first of all, there are no privacy breaches here. We are not looking through personal text messages or emails. We are only looking from where something goes, like where something comes from and where it goes. And that is going to help us solve for the issue. We're not looking through personal information. And also, this is about 2009 and 2011. How is this relevant in 2021 when we have completely different and more advanced issues when it comes to cybersecurity? They've also stated we're already solving for this because we have better technology. But what I'm going to say is that better technology is absolutely useless without the NSA having the authority to use it. And they also have not specified about the technology and what it is and like what it's helping them with. So we have to ask, is this even a warrant? Is this even true? What is this better technology? What is it doing? It's clearly not solving for the issue, which is foreign entities using US servers to breach our security when it comes to the internet. Next, they've said that this is going to increase breaches. They said more surveillance equals more breaches. While surveillance tools can be exploited, they are really strongly protected and data breaches are unlikely. And what we can see is by the NSA expanding their powers, they will be able to counter these data breaches better because they will know where they come from. Right now, they aren't even able to do that. But this is unlikely anyways. What is more likely, judges, is for an internet with no protection to have data breaches, or an internet with strong protection to have some data breaches that utilize the rare flaws in its protection, which is foreign entities using US servers. So onto our plan. We are first saying that this is going to protect American privacy, and we've provided specific warrant for this and examples. And they've said this directly clashes with their second contention, which is that it's compromising privacy by increasing access cyber criminals have to our surveillance. We are not giving cyber criminals access to our surveillance by making sure that we can deal with threats that are using US servers. Once again, surveillance tools are harder to hack than the internet, and they prevent the internet as a whole from being hacked because we are making sure that people using US servers to get information from its citizens are not able to get away with this because we can track them. Next, they've said to counter our second contention is that this is not going to protect American lives. They've said that groups like the Taliban don't have anything to do with cyber attacks. The thing that we were saying, the link we made here is the Taliban is not cyber attacking us. China is, and Russia is, and they're doing this through US servers, which falls under US territory. We've stated this all in our plan. This all makes sense. And then these foreign entities using US servers to hack into our military information are going to be able to publish this information however they would like. And they could share this with the Taliban. They could share this with like who we are fighting with in foreign countries to give them a militaristic advantage against us because they don't like our country. This is a serious issue. Just because the Taliban isn't hacking us doesn't mean they can't get this information, because once we are hacked and once somebody has this information is pretty much public for good because they can share it with whoever we want, and the US government no longer has any control over it. So just going over our plan again, we are going to get Congress to pass legislation that allows the NSA to track the flow of data on the internet in the US. And they've said this is not a substantial increase. This is a substantial increase in power, as the NSA cannot even look into what data has passed through what server, which is allowing hackers, specifically foreign hackers who are serious threats to our country, to hide their attacks. This is an issue because they are using US servers. So this falls under US territory, and the NSA cannot currently find out who is doing this and effectively counter it due to American laws. Thank you, and I am proud to propose.
All right, great. I'm just going to get a timer out really quickly. But before that, is everyone ready? All right, time can start now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sophie Rivas-Plata, and I'm the second speaker on the negation side of today's debate. I'm going to first jump into my opponent's plan, then go over their one main contention, and then I'll be moving on to my own contentions at the end. So starting off with my opponent's plan. Under this plan, they have clearly stated plenty of times that their plan is to once again get Congress to pass this legislation to allow the NSA to be able to look into surveillance systems that have been in place in the United States. But what we see in parliamentary debate, there are a few key factors that you need in a plan. For example, the who, what, where, when, and then the why would be your contentions. But to start off with this, in my opponent's plan, they clearly laid out what they're planning to do, but they haven't given any any details necessary in order to truly understand how they're going to implement this plan. We understand that fiat does exist and that my opponent's resolution would inherently pass, but there's still details we need in order to actually see that this plan would function. So for example, the main issues that we're missing from my opponent's side is the funding and the timeline. So a timeline is extremely sure.
Why didn't you ask us questions about this in our first speech when we could have answered them about our plan?
This is just simply a refutation against your plan and pointing out the weaknesses in your plan. It is up to the affirmation side to give all the details in their plan, and any changes they were to make after they first delivered their plan would be a moving target violation. So anyways, where I was. So starting off with the timeline, as I already stated, my opponents have offered not a single timeline at all present in anywhere in their entire case. And this itself makes it impossible for us to actually analyze this plan in its entirety. We need to know when this plan would be implemented, or else we cannot actually adequately look at the impacts that this plan would make. For all we know, this plan could be passed tomorrow prematurely or 20 years from now. These are details that my opponents need to offer in their plan. And once again, they did not. Another part of the plan that they didn't specify is funding. If my opponents didn't want any funding whatsoever, they could have specified it. But in order for the United States government to get access to the surveillance footage and to actually increase surveillance within once again the United States, even if it's not towards individual people, this would still take at least $1 billion annually. Something that once again my opponents did not specify whatsoever. This $1 billion estimate once again is from New York Times. So this is once again funding that my opponents did not even give. Without this funding, once again their plan does not work. If with no funding and no timeline, their plan can never work in the real world. Now, moving on into their one contention. This overall contention is talking about protecting the United States privacy. But as Mercer had already started to go through in his own speech, I'm just going to go over our main issue with this contention. So the main problem with this contention is my opponents only really talk about examples of cyber attacks coming directly from foreign countries. My opponents try to refute this point by saying that it goes through United States servers. But once again, as my opponents didn't offer the definitions, let's just talk over what the word launched actually means. The word launch is really just to begin something in a certain place, to start something, to set something into motion, for example. But when we look at how cyber attacks actually take place, we have to look through the stages in which cyber attacks actually happen. We see that first of all, the first starting point of cyber attacks are the hackers surveying their surroundings or the internet in general and looking for vulnerabilities and access points. Once again, this would include access points of these servers. That would still mean that these attacks are being launched from other countries and not the United States. The launched part of cyber attacks in general would still take place from foreign countries. Every single example that they have brought up of these cyber attacks have been launched from foreign countries, because once again, the very first step in any cyber attack is identifying vulnerabilities in what you are trying to attack. Yes?
Was WannaCry, which we mentioned in our first contention, was that not launched from the United States?
Once again, I just went through what I was able to pick up from your speech. And for these ones, I got examples from China and from Russia trying to, once again, do cyber attacks on the United States. You said that you're not sure where they all came from, but with assumptions that they came from places like Russia and from China. But once again, just because they're they go through United States servers does not mean in any sense of the word that they are not attacks from these specific countries, from the countries that they were launched from the very first part of the attack. It was taking place in a different country. This would fall under with the negation side and talking about how we have plenty of access we already have in order to go against these cyber attacks. My opponents are not defending attacks launched from the United States. They're trying to defend something that is not even in the resolution. So with these clarifications gone over, I'm just going to jump right into my own contentions on the negation side. So for our first contention, we talk about how we are fully equipped in every way of the word in order to actually take care of these cyber attacks. In this point, my opponents have a few responses to it. they talk about our how the example we brought up from 2009 to 2011 is not relevant because it's outdated information. But I think my opponents are extremely confused on what this piece of information actually is. As Mercer already stated in his first speech, that this piece of evidence that we brought up was showing where the peak of cyber attacks were in 2009 to 2011, but how we've seen a decrease every single year since then. This is why this piece of evidence is relevant, because we understand that the United States has had plenty of issues with cyber attacks in the past, but we've seen that the peak of this within 2009 and 2011 has drastically decreased because of the technology that the NSA and Homeland Security, for example, have been implementing because of these relationships that they have and the abilities, and the jurisdiction and abilities that they are given by collaborating with each other, with the abilities, with the research, with the resources and the technology that we have been creating since these times where cyber attacks have actually peaked. We've actually seen the decrease because of what we have already mentioned, because of the technology and the resources. So yeah, this information is vital for today's debate because it's showing the peak of cyber attacks and how we've seen a drastic decrease since. Yes.
Don't you think that if we are having such issues right now with cybersecurity, you can see it all over in the news. It's a huge topic that whatever happened after 2011 was not sufficient to get rid of the problem.
Yeah. With that being said, I do completely understand and agree. Mercer and I both know that there are cybersecurity threats in the status quo, but almost all of them, cybersecurity attacks threatening the United States, are once again being launched from other countries. That is not what the affirmation is advocating for in today's debate. And this is the biggest point in today's debate. My opponents are trying to argue that attacks from Russia and from China are being launched in the United States because they use US servers, when they're completely neglecting the very first part of a cyber attack, which would be considered what the launching point of a cyber attack actually is. So moving on, since the second refutation my opponents gave to our first contention is the fact that the technology is useless without jurisdiction, without authority, without the authority over surveillance. But once again, Mercer and I firmly believe that this surveillance is not necessary in order to protect the United States and in order to catch cyber terrorists from other countries, for example, because we know that we have the jurisdiction in the status quo in order to take care of the foreign countries. My opponents are supposed to be advocating for the United States, yet they completely fail to do so. So yeah, and they talk about how they don't know what this technology actually is and how we're lying about it and how it's not real, for example. But once again, we can just outline how this technology is used. First of all, a lot of these cyber attacks come from, once again, people from other countries surveying into social media and the internet. And with the new developed programs, it's usually programming, we're able to actually find these people before the attacks are started and stop the threat at the source. So with this, this concludes my speech, and have a negation ballot. Thank you.
All right, before I begin my 4-minute speech, is everyone ready? Awesome. All right, my time will begin now. Hello, once again. I'm first going to be going over the biggest flaw that I've found on the government side, and then be going over some voter issues. Voter issues essentially to summarize the round and essentially give you the reasons why the opposition has finally won. And lastly, a world versus world comparison with the weighing mechanism brought up at the beginning of the round, that being net benefits. Let's get into the biggest flaw on the government side. We see that the government is failing to acknowledge that the NSA, along with the Homeland Security, has significantly improved its capabilities without increasing surveillance. The entire plan brought upon our side, on the government side, is that they're trying to increase surveillance that will give cyber criminals more opportunities to attack our servers. Judge, it is simple. If we increase the cyberspace being the intelligence and being the surveillance that is offered in the United States, domestic surveillance, there is more opportunity for foreign individuals to hack the United States. We need to realize, Judge, that it is important to restrict the amount of surveillance that we're offering to the public, because once we are expanding from the NSA, if they're using all of this surveillance, it's going to become public knowledge based off of all of the examples that I have brought up in my own speech. It has always been compromised. Once surveillance is increased, it has always been attacked with cyber criminals. Therefore, a system that is already working to squash all of the current cyber criminals has been working, and it is important to sustain it. And that means you must be voting on the opposition side. So let's go into this. The NSA itself right now has cyberspace and has been working with the internet, social media, and elsewhere to stop attacks, like I mentioned in my very first speech. Since 2009 to 2011, a date that they think has no relevance at all to 2021. What I'm saying is that from this time period to now in 2021, the amount of domestic cybersecurity attacks has significantly decreased. It has saved, according to the New York Times, billions of United States dollars. And I'd like to go into one last flaw on the government side before I go into voter issues. We need to realize that they lose because the plan alone itself does not have a timeline and does not have the specificities to actually accomplish what they're trying to do. And on top of that, they have only one contention that is heavily dependent on foreign attacks, which is not the topic at hand. Judge, I'm going to walk through one more time because this is very important, and this is the last time I can convince you why this is a foreign attack and not one that is launched from the United States. Let's say I was an individual who lived in Russia and I was launching a cyber criminal attack upon the United States. Me being Russian and being able to hack into the United States servers means that I started my attack in Russia. I managed to make it to the United States to further my attack. The launch point had already started in Russia, but it is only being furthered with United States servers. Therefore, we must be looking at cyber criminals in the United States. You must be voting on the opposition on that point alone. Our voter issues is first, who best stops foreign attackers? And it is clearly the government side. Our first disadvantage have been proving that technology itself has been getting better, and the New York Times has found that we've saved billions of dollars in healthcare, education, occupation, and hundreds of other industries. On the opposition side, they're just giving more opportunities for criminals to attack our own intelligence. Our second voter issue, who truly preserves United States privacy? Because on the opposition, they're going to see what I brought up in my first speech, what happened to SolarWinds when they saw more attacks once they increased their surveillance. Please vote on the opposition side because we give less access to cyber criminals. Vote on our probability, our magnitude, because it is very high and it is already working. Judge, vote on a system that is working and do not vote for the government that is going to compromise the wonderful technology that is stopping cyber criminals. Vote on the opposition. Thank you.
All right. If everybody is ready, 1 minute as I pull up the timer, I would like to begin my final rebuttal. Everyone? All right. I'd like to begin my time now. All right, so a quick roadmap. First, I will be reiterating our plan, then going through the disadvantages of the opposition's case, and then finally moving on to explain the advantages of ours and why we are actually providing the biggest net benefit to the United States people by expanding the NSA's jurisdiction. So quickly, to reiterate what has already been said about the who, what, where, and why about our plan, just to put it in simple parliamentary terms, the who is the NSA, what is the NSA having increased surveillance ability, where is within the US territories, and when we have fiat it as soon as possible because this bill is going to pass, and why, as we have stated, to protect American privacy and American lives. Now, moving on. So basically, the opposition has tried to refute our entire argument by saying that all of the examples we can provide are foreign. We state clearly that, in our opinion, these attacks count as attacks not from the US because when they are deployed in US servers, it doesn't matter who originally wrote the malware because clearly the actual launch point is within the United States. To make an analogy, it doesn't matter who built the missile, it matters where the missile was launched. Both matter, but in this context, it matters where the missile was launched. Even if you don't find these definitions, however, yeah, one second.
Yeah, so just for judges' clarification, POO is pretty much if there is a violation happening in the last speech, then the other side is able to make a POO to explain the violation. Both sides get time to explain what the POO is or to defend it, and then speech continues. So for our POO, Mercer and I recognize that my opponents just did a moving target violation. Nowhere in their first speech or second speech did they say that they had a timeline for their plan and that it was ASAP, because ASAP would be considered a timeline in and of itself. My opponents did not offer a timeline up until this very last speech, so Mercer and I do not have time to respond to it, but on top of this, it would be considered a moving target violation, since everything about your plan must be detailed in the beginning of your first speech. But it's judge's discretion.
All right, quickly to respond before I resume time. I think that when we are talking about a theoretical debate that is answering a very simple question and not asking about a specific policy change happening, a timeline is less important than actually making sure the logic in place. I think it was fairly clear that because we are assuming the bill passes, we can easily assume that the bill passes right now. But either way, it doesn't really affect our logic when the bill passes, because obviously I think it's fairly easy to assume that's going to pass at some point. And so clearly all of our benefits flow through just whenever the United States chooses that to occur. All right, anyway, judge's discretion. I don't want to get into this anymore. I would like to resume my time now. I count 3 minutes and 56 seconds on the clock. So even if you don't buy the definition of launch in the US, however, judges, because obviously definition debates are messy and really just unwanted, it is clear that our logic holds regardless of whether or not you choose, which definition you choose, because regardless of where the attack was first planned, the fact holds that the NSA is unable to trace it because it is being launched in the US when it is being deployed through US servers. So clearly the problems remain the same regardless of the actual origin of the attack, and because the breach data can percolate throughout the entire world. So our logic still holds regardless of whose definition you buy. So now moving on to the opposition's argument. The op argues that the government is currently able to protect the United States, saying that we have both the tech and the jurisdiction to do so. Judges, it would be really lovely if this were the case. However, there just seems to be very little proof that it is. As we have stated, a recent cyber attack, which we think may have come from Russia originally, but launched through US servers, recently breached basically the entirety of US military servers. Clearly, cybersecurity is still a major problem in the United States. Also, there's no really near evidence of our tech being significantly better than the rest of the world. Even if we've improved since 2011, the rest of the world can easily have improved, and without any further evidence as to indicate either, it's very difficult to make this argument, in my opinion, as the opposition. We think that this argument should fall on the fact that there's no proof that it's actually true. Also, finally, we have clearly stated that the jurisdiction is not enough right now because the NSA or Homeland Security, for that matter, but we talked about the NSA in this debate, they cannot track U.S. data where it is flowing, and that hackers are constantly utilizing this to actually hack servers in the United States. All right, the op also makes the argument that more surveillance means more attacks, because whenever in history, once again a very broad claim, to someone increases surveillance, there is actually just more breaching of surveillance. So this actually makes very little sense, judges, when you think about this logically, because NSA tools that would be implemented are presumably well protected. Cybersecurity tools are well protected against hacks, and so they are much less likely to be compromised than the unprotected information on the general web. If you are a hacker, you're much more likely to attack the unprotected site, which contains a pass with the same information, than the well-protected site. So it doesn't really make sense that more surveillance would actually mean more attacks, because currently the lack of surveillance has meant a lot of attacks, and the logic that doesn't flow through on why more surveillance would actually increase more attacks. So clearly, judges, cybersecurity is still a major problem in the status quo, and the opposition's argument for the status quo does not really hold or flow through. So our plan fixes these issues through expanding the NSA's authority. And so now, because through increased authority, the NSA could use the tools that it has for foreign, or the US government can use the tools it has for foreign surveillance to also protect the United States' cybersecurity. Once again, this will be passed through legislation that allows the NSA to specifically just track where data is going in the United States. And once again, it would protect American privacy, because it will allow us to track where cyber attacks are coming from and essentially shore up our weaknesses, because no longer can hackers just exist, like thrive in this NSA blind spot that exists, and also protect American lives, because as recent military breaches have demonstrated, the lack of oversight the NSA has within the United States has been a major problem, has been a major safety issue, in terms of our national defense. So clearly expanding the NSA's jurisdiction will help. Because once again, we do agree that the NSA has the tools needed to actually do this. They just they lack the jurisdiction right now. So clearly expanding the NSA's jurisdiction, while would actually only bring about a benefit to all Americans because it would reduce the number of these dangerous cyber attacks, because all the tools that the opposition so strongly advertises would actually be able to be used to their fullest potential. And thank you for on this reasons I am proud to propose.
Hi, I'm ready to get started whenever you are.
Okay. Is everybody here? The other two. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I can go first. So for me, I'll be honest, I was very confused about the whole topic. I'm not even sure I understood everything well, so I apologize if I misunderstood anybody. But for me, sort of gov side made more sense, because the definition of launch, though sort of, I think opposition, I hope I'm saying it correct. Okay. For me, yeah, the gov side one, which is Rose and Toika, right? Yeah. I just sort of didn't buy in that the definition of launch that opposition was trying to give, and I could be wrong, but that's just sort of how much I understood it. Also, the argument about sort of increased surveillance leads to increased breaches didn't make sense to me. However, I'm not sure about my technical skills myself, so I don't know if that's correct or not correct. So that's where I stood.
Okay, so my RFD is a little bit longer. I will say I took a little bit longer adjudicating this in the last one. It was a pretty messy round. It was kind of a definitions debate, but it didn't have to be, which is a little bit disappointing. So talk about definitions at the top. So I wanted to hear more from Gov about like the problems with US hackers, like just talking more about how like maybe like internal hackers have more access to US technology, have more access to like US servers. The fact that the whole case really did rest on foreign surveillance, I had to agree with Op on that one. In terms of whether or not in terms of definition of launch, I think that's pretty a wash, but I like generally also like the other judge, I do lean up on this one. I do think that like launching probably does talk about like specifically US hackers hacking into US servers. I do think that this does leave Gov still a little bit of room for argumentation. A lot of that came from the PMR, which was pretty new, but it wasn't called new. But PMR still did a good job of like talking about arguments that were spoken about in the rest of Gov. They just didn't, clarify that those were not unique to like foreign hackers and also applied to US hackers. Until PMR, which was probably new. But anyway, I still think like for the POO on the timeline, I think this is fairly a wash. I think like Gov is probably right to point out it doesn't matter that much in the round that like a timeline wasn't given. Mm-hmm. I think that I also would have assumed it's just like ASAP. But even without timeline being considered, like it doesn't really change the round all that much. So the first question I ask myself is like, what actually stops hackers? Is it like jurisdiction? Is it technology? If we talk about jurisdiction, this means that like the thing that we're talking about jurisdiction is like the source of the attack being unclear, which also like weakens the definition debate, makes it less important, because if you don't know what the source of the attack is, then you don't know like if we're actually getting more surveillance on just like all the attacks because we don't know where they start, so like it doesn't actually matter where they're launched, or does this mean that or is there like a larger jurisdiction here? Like I really want to hear more about like what this is actually like, what the more jurisdiction would actually do besides just like let us see the source of the attacks. I was also a little bit unclear like if technology and jurisdiction overlapped. But what we do see a little bit is that like the technology has decreased the number of hackers, the number of like attacks that have happened. We do see that like from like the 2009-2011 statistic. I think that flowed through pretty well through the round. But then I have to evaluate sort of like more surveillance equals more breaches claim. I think this is also kind of a wash, because I think like, do more breaches happen actually because of more technology that occurs, which would occur on both sides of the house? I would say I generally believe that like better protection equals less hacking, which which comes out of PMR. But I also do believe a little bit that like being more present on the internet means like more people can see what the NSA is doing, which leans op. There wasn't too much interaction of like which side I should believe over the other, except just being like my side is right. But there wasn't too much actual comparison on the impact level of like what this would mean. So this kind of goes a wash. So where do I vote here? The one thing that flowed through the round that wasn't, or there are probably multiple things, but the one thing that stood out to me as being important in the round that wasn't responded to and was pulled through all the way through the ops case was the money that you save by not making like more surveillance technology, because, you know, insofar as like giving the NSA more power, whether that means like just finding out source of attacks, whether that means more things than that, it will cost them more money to do that. And then talking about the impacts on like healthcare and other things, like that probably could have been fleshed out a little bit better, probably could have been like a bigger part of the LOR. But it did enough in the round and was unique enough in the round that I think that that's where the debate ends up falling here. I know that that's like a minuscule point, that might be like more of a minuscule point, like that might frustrate Gov a little bit, but unfortunately, like the round didn't have too much like direct clash in it. That I could evaluate like one side over the other super clearly. And I think also because all of the debate the Gov side did rest on like this foreign hacking point, which was contested throughout the round. It did weaken Gov side quite a bit. For those reasons, I voted up. So I'm glad you guys got to hear both sides of the RFD. Good luck in the rest of the tournament. You guys are doing great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for judging.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice night, everyone.
Rest of your day.
Good luck tomorrow.